much for tuning in to another episode of Conversations with Chan. Today I have Eve, I'm not going to mispronounce your last name, Eve and Stephen today. They are a creative team. They go by the name of EveNSteve, and I think that is so cute. I'm sorry, that's not professional. I like that so much. And so, we're going to talk about your book, A Year of No Sugar, and also what you're doing in the 2021 the Queens New York Black and Brown Film Festival. So that is something that is exciting. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. So before we started recording and I was reading your bio, I saw the year with no sugar. Can you just talk about that for a little bit? Because a year.
Yeah, so somehow I convinced my family back in 2011, believe it or not, to go for an entire year without eating any added sugar in our food. I had watched a video on Facebook that talked all about how sugar, and added sugar specifically, in our food was the culprit behind so many contemporary Western diseases that we suffer from today. Diabetes and heart disease and hypertension and some kinds of cancer, not to mention obesity, metabolic syndrome, you name it. It was like everything on the list related back to sugar. So I convinced my family to do this. I had a blog for a year and wrote all the stories, wrote about recipes we developed, and the book came out in 2014, and our whole family got to go on the Dr. Oz show to talk about it.
Oh, wow. I'm just in awe because, I'm from the South, and we make sweet tea, and I'm like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me I can't have my sweet tea? But I think that the benefits of doing that were great.
We learned a lot.
We learned a tremendous amount. And that's the thing. A lot of people say to me, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't do what you did." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you don't have to."
Right.
Because we already did it. Right? Like, so
you can read about it.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And it's more important to have the information. And then you're armed when you go to the supermarket, when you go to the restaurant, and you know what you're getting into, and you can make better choices. Say, okay, this is worth it to me, but maybe those other things aren't.
And a lot of the things that we learned throughout the year, it was trial and error at first, figuring out what you could eat.
We made all kinds of mistakes.
Yeah, going out to eat was very difficult unless you knew the restaurant, you knew what they were putting in the foods, because processed foods have so much sugar added to it.
What amazed me, even to this day, is we'd go to a restaurant, we'd ask them, hey, does this dressing or this gravy or this soup have sugar in it? And they didn't know. So, they don't even know what they're serving you.
How you telling somebody something you don't know what's in it? See, now you got me thinking a little bit now. See, wait a minute. If I ask you what's in it, you can't tell me. Now we have a problem. Wait a minute now.
There's over 60 different names that they put on ingredient lists that all mean the same thing. They all mean added sugar, but they have all these different names, so that trips you up. You don't what the heck is this? You don't know. Well, it's actually sugar. Right. And then if you put them all together, it might be the first ingredient on that ingredient list. Yeah. That might be, the main thing that's in it.
The first one is the one that's the most in the.
Oh, so what they'll do is they'll take an ingredient and have 10 different names for sugar, and then it isn't the first one.
Right. So it's spread out, but you don't really realize, so yeah, it's gotten better though. There's a lot more awareness now than there was back in 2011.
Yeah. About
the pervasiveness of sugar and how bad it is for us. Back when we did this project, everyone was like, why do you care? Why
Our family thought we were crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they're thinking Christmas, Halloween, birthdays, and they're just looking at us like, what are you doing? And it was a difficult year, but I will say that our girls being young at the time, they learned an awful lot about food, and they make good choices nowadays, by and large.
At the time, they were ages 6 and 11. And people say, oh, that must have been horrible. But actually, because they were so young, they actually didn't realize they had any other choice but to do what we said.
They couldn't say no.
I mean, your kids, you really don't have what you're fed is what you're fed. So that is a good thing. I'm glad that there was some learning aspects from it. Now it's getting me the wheels in my turning, because I did do that when my children were younger. I made sure they didn't have processed food or or you know, additives and stuff like that because of the, you know, when they were young, and I read about it, but it didn't realize that some of the things, like, I'm going back in my head, I was like, I thought I was really, you know, on it, but, you know, yeah, that was crazy. You know, that
So
was,
many misconceptions out there, you know,
yeah.
fruit juice is good for you, you know. No, it's not.
No, because even when you water it down, you're still, like, I used to do half water, half apple juice, and not realizing there was still sugar, you know. But you know, I live, you know, my children are older now. My oldest is 18, so it's like, you know, I did have a doctor say that was good. You took all of those, the diets and stuff, but you really can't. I really couldn't get them all the way out of it.
Yeah.
Because of where we live, you know, we lived in West Virginia. So I went to the farmer's market. I did all this. So the natural sugars were there, you know, and, you know, it was a process. So, you know, I didn't pick up a book. I should have, but, you know, I did what, you know, it wasn't no any honey buns or sodas or stuff like that. Like when they went to other people's houses, they were like, wait a minute, this isn't candy. Don't tell my children yogurt isn't candy.
Right.
Okay. But let's talk about your you have a film, and I'm excited because, you know, I wanted to know, I'm reading the bio and I'm seeing someone that I've never heard about, and I'm like, wow, like you all did a film. So, and this is bringing, you know, because in Black history we're taught you know, the main Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and all of those. And in the South, my father made sure he taught me about others that are not listed in the books. And, you know, we, you know, coming from a child that our family was on plantation, we had all of this. Now, like, especially, that is amazing that you have brought, you know, the film is called The Home of My Choice, The Legacy of Alexander Twilight. Like, I'm like, wowzer. You know, like, I know, like, it's like the 2021 is like, we're still discovering Black history, and I feel like Black history is American history. I don't understand why we have to have a label or a special month, but here we are. And hopefully one day we'll get to the point where it's American history. Yeah. And, you know, it's, you know, succinct with everything we're taught. And these, what books? The books that, you know, textbooks will get on board, and, you know, the curriculums will change. But, you know, tell me more about this film and how it came about. Like,
well, Eve and I have been working together now for 2 years. We've been married for 23 and have been knowing each other for well over 25. And she's always had her writing career, and I've had my photography career. And 2 years ago, we decided, you know what, why don't we work together and form EveNSteve? And we finally trusted each other after, you know, 21 years of marriage.
Years.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's only been a little while. So
yeah, we figured it was good.
I guess we're good now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so a lot of the works that we make come into 3 different categories. We make work that's history inspired, work that's site specific, or work that's a narrative, and we just sort of tell a story. And Alexander Twilight lived in a town called Brownington, Vermont, which is way up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont.
So this work would fall under the historical works.
Yeah, I would say primarily, though it is site specific as well.
Yes, because it's very specific.
Right.
All the images that are taken in the artwork and show up in the film were taken in
Brownington,
Vermont. Now, what's really neat about this is that they have a historic village there that anyone can go visit.
It's completely preserved.
It's a network of buildings.
Yep.
There's still a dirt road that runs through the town. And it's almost like you're stepping back into the 1800s.
Yeah.
It's an amazing feeling to go there and visit.
There's a lot of Amish that live around there. So you've got, you know, horses and buggies going by, and it's very beautiful. But, you know, when we went there, I was interested in the idea of Alexander Twilight. But when we started,
we didn't know very much.
We didn't know a lot. And what we found out is there's also not a lot of information. There are a lot of
holes
yeah.
in the history. He didn't leave behind lots and lots of writing or letters that we know of. So we had to do some digging.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating what we found out.
Yeah, he's one of the most, I think, interesting people that we've really looked at.
He's a real larger than life figure.
Yes.
He's also kind of enigmatic. He's celebrated today, and actually the state of Vermont this summer
was his 225th birthday.
Yes, so they made it Alexander Twilight Day in Vermont. And in particular, we're celebrating his accomplishments as the first African-American to graduate from college and that was in 1823
From Middlebury
from
College.
Middlebury College in Vermont. And he also was the first person of color to be elected to the Vermont legislature.
Right.
So he was an incredible guy, and he came from very humble circumstances.
He was an indentured servant until he was 25.
No, till he was 20.
Sorry, 20. And, you know, managed to put himself in school. And his lifelong passion was education. It's interesting. He was a minister.
Education was his life's work.
Right. And
So, even as an indentured servant, so there's a difference. You have slaves.
Yep.
And so he received compensation for his work. Oh, wow.
but he's also complicated in that Professor Hart, who's a professor emeritus at Middlebury College, he's like the expert on Twilight. And we've come to know him, obviously, during our research. And he would say that the more accurate way to describe Twilight today would be as a person of color, because there's so much that we don't know about Twilight that it's complicated. His identity is complicated. And I think that speaks a lot to us in 2021 as to how we construct our identities. And that's what I think is so great about Twilight, is that his life and his circumstances and how he
proceeded through his life,
yes.
and then how other people perceived him, both during his lifetime and since, tells us a lot about ourselves and how we construct identity.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it wasn't until 1974 that Middlebury College discovered and began to celebrate the fact that Alexander Twilight was the first African-American or person of color graduate from college. And they sort of claimed that title. We have the first one. And there are other colleges who also make a similar claim.
And that's how this all came about.
And they're debating, you know, because this is...
They're trying to get the first. Like, they want
totally.
Everybody wants to be trying to say we were first, right? And Vermont in particular has a history of being very proud of itself, patting itself on the back for being very progressive. Like, we were the first state to abolish slavery. And we never returned people who were running away from slavery. We had a policy. You got here, you basically were safe. Nobody was going to turn you over and send you back.
Yet when you scratch the surface on a lot of this, you realize, especially with someone like Twilight.
I just look at, you know, when someone wants to be the first to say they had, like, that's kind of a weird claim to fame. Like, I want to be the first to be the ones. I'm like, okay, listen, I get it. But at the same time, it's like, you know, African Americans are people too, are people of color, because I just looked at it, and because, I mean, he was of mixed race, but still the one drop rule does apply. So he's still black. I mean, no matter what, it's palatable black, or, you know, it's you're black. I mean, that's just how that works in the grand scheme. And being from the South, that's just what we.
Well, especially during that time period.
Right. Yeah. And up here, you know, what was interesting is that in the early census of Twilight's life, the U.S. Census that was conducted when his father was still around, they were listed as...
They were put in the category, it was called like other free persons. So basically it meant you were not white, you were something else.
You could be Native American, you could be a mix, you could be all sorts of stuff. But when his father left... So
his father leaves before...
And no one knows why.
Sometime before the next census, that original census was in 1800. The next census comes around in 1810. And suddenly the father's gone. We don't know why, we don't know where he went.
Right.
And the family takes on a new status. They're now classified under the census as white.
Right.
As free white. Because of their skin color.
Yes. And
exactly.
Yes.
And then Twilight then goes on to live his incredibly remarkable life.
Amazing life.
And no one, at least in the historical documents that exist that we know of, no one ever talks about him being African American, being a person of color. Never comes up. Because then fast forward, 1974.
Right after the civil rights, big engagements are happening, all of a sudden Middlebury's like, we're first. You know, and there's this whole...
So it's complicated, right? It raises all these questions.
I'll kind of give a little, because where I grew up, if you could pass, you took that pass.
Yes.
You know, there were so many people because they couldn't teach or they couldn't get the benefits of certain things. And if you could be light enough and have the hair texture to pass, you took that pass, that hall pass, and you ran with it.
That seems to be sort of the case here. I mean, Twilight was a minister. We have a couple dozen of his sermons
that have been recently discovered.
Like in the last 20 years. There's really, like, he didn't keep a diary, didn't keep any of that type of information. So a lot of this is gleaming from what his students wrote about him, you know, his friends. His wife was white. She was from New Hampshire, from a wealthy family. So in a lot of the research that we've come up with here too, you know, if you could pass, obviously you would, because there were all sorts of things that would be possible that wouldn't be otherwise, even in a state like Vermont.
Sure. So it's just a very interesting dynamic. Meanwhile, in 1950, and all of this information we're talking about shows up in the film, and it shows up in the artwork. So this is the benefit of having the imagery, that we can then write the words in and have sort of chronology and talk about his life and different things that happened then and since.
Right.
And we're sort of trying to weave this interesting tapestry that touches on questions of identity that we're grappling with today. So, you know, and we like to say that art helps us make sense of the world around us. You know, we firmly believe that. So in 1951, a Vermont insurance company decides to use Twilight's legacy to sell insurance. So they put this ad in the Saturday Evening Post. They have a picture of him, and you know, he is there, you know, with muscles, and he's building a dormitory for his school, which he actually did. He built a 4-story granite dormitory, which is still there.
Yeah,
you can go visit it when you go to Brownington, and it's incredibly impressive even today. And local legend has it that he built it single-handedly.
Not happening.
With a pulley he made himself and an ox.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's John Henry now. Okay, so we're just gonna mix in folklore and sprinkle it to make it a little bit great.
That's right.
There's a lot of mythology around him.
So they're going to use this, you know, they want to use this Vermonter Yankee ingenuity, you know, myth to sell insurance. And they make this painting of him in the ad. And of course, in the ad, he's white, 1951. Right. So what we were really intrigued by is how his identity changes depending on who's using him to what end. Right. We want him to be white. We want him to be black. We want him to be African American. We want to be first.
Right.
You know, what gives us this right to put all this stuff on Alexander Twilight? Right. He was an incredible man by any measure.
And a lot of this is about deconstructing whiteness in Vermont.
Yes. How white people start to use the narratives of people of color to get things they want to, you know, to tell the story they want to tell. So we're trying to sort of unpack.
I mean, it's not far-fetched because it's done, you know, outside of Vermont too.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
Yes.
And it was fascinating though, looking at the historical record and learning. I mean, his lifelong passion was education. He ran for the State House on the grounds of education.
Exclusively to get more money for his school.
Yeah, that was his whole purpose to go. So, and yet his identity and how he's used over time has changed. So we wanted a piece, you know, you can only pack so much responsibility into an A artwork or into a movie, but we wanted to create an artwork, and I can talk about how the movie came to be, but originally it started out as an artwork. It was going to be a visual artwork on the wall. It's this massive 18-foot wide piece that we made. And it was to provide a platform for people to start a conversation. That's really what we wanted. And then the movies that we've been making, and we've made a few now, kind of came about as a result of the pandemic. We wanted to find a way for people to be able to see our artwork and engage with our artwork safely. And a movie that was online seemed to make the most sense. So we decided, and we've done small movies over time.
And we generally put them on our website.
Right. But we've done now several that are full length, you know, 20, 25-minute long documentaries. And, you know, so becoming filmmakers was never really our intention, but it's sort of become this wonderful way for people to
kind
see
of
and
accidental
share.
Filmmakers.
Yeah, and we were very excited when we got into the Queen's Underground. It's our first film festival ever.
Yes,
we were so excited.
Super honored. Super excited.
But you're bringing attention to someone who wanted to educate and someone who had a passion for education and wanted to do something greater for his students and his community. So to me, what better way than to have to be in a film festival for something that's so great, to highlight such an awesome man who, you know, his goal was to to educate and help people to learn and to connect without, and I'm loving the fact that he that was his focus. Like, that is
very much so. Education was 100% what he cared about. And that's actually the kind of thing that we found interesting in researching this, how of a dedicated teacher he was. There's letters from, former students.
Oh, he was a beloved educator. And he, along with his wife, they were sort of surrogate parents for these students who would come from all over Vermont. And they would live there, of course. It was kind of a boarding school atmosphere. This 4-story building was the dormitory, and he would teach them, and she would feed them.
And he was also a bit of a prankster, though.
Yes, yeah. He had a sense of humor. He would play practical jokes on his students, when everyone was getting a little too bored. He was a funny guy, and well remembered for it. Generations of students, probably thousands of students he educated during his lifetime, and made a big impact. And many of them went on to become teachers themselves because they were so inspired by him.
Yet outside of Vermont, like, our children grew up in school learning about Alexander Twilight. Vermont does teach his legacy in school. Yet I speak to friends across the country and they have no idea who Alexander Twilight is. And
I didn't know.
Yeah. And we didn't really either. I mean, a lot of the ways that Eve and I make an artwork is we'll see something that we like and something that we think is interesting, and we'll start to do a little research, do a little scouting. And this particular project just exploded in front of us, and it became all consuming. And then it turned out that we started making the artwork in the film in August. And of course, his birthday is in September 23rd. And then it became sort of this timeline of, can we get the film done so it can be part of the celebration for his 225th birthday?
And we made it.
It
was part of the celebration.
And then it was also,
that was huge.
And it was also part of an exhibition that we were just in.
Yes.
In Burlington at the Burlington City Arts. It was a show called Unprecedented, and it was looking at artists and what they were doing during these difficult times. And so we had two artworks. We had The Home of My Choice about Alexander Twilight, and then we had another artwork and movie that we did called A Wonderful Plague, that looks at a history of pandemics and plagues throughout human existence.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And so those two movies were playing sort of side by side, and the films were mirroring each other.
I'm intrigued about the history of plagues and stuff, because for us to be so advanced and now we're in a pandemic, it's like, really?
Yeah, the thing about plagues is one of the people who speaks in the movie is Rick Kadur. He's a Warhol fellow, and he mentions,
and he's a critic
and a friend of ours,
curator.
And he mentions in the piece that plague is part of humanity.
It's part of the human experience, and you see it repeating over and over again throughout time.
So we chose. I went to Provincetown on March 13th, which is like right before everything shut down last year, and there was a smallpox cemetery way out in the forest that I was interested in photographing. And I chose Provincetown because last year was the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower, which was in Provincetown. There's a smallpox cemetery. There's also, because of its high population of gay individuals, it was devastated, of course, during the HIV pandemic, which of course is still going on, but it was back in the 80s and 90s. In particular, and it seemed to be this place that,
like a nexus of all these different horrible events. So you get this beautiful imagery that he takes, but it's also very haunting. Some of the imagery captures the smallpox cemetery, which is in the middle of some woods, and it's extremely difficult to find, and it's all grown over, and it's a very lonely, sad feeling place. And it gives you a real feeling of isolation.
What it meant to be sick, and what it meant to be that when you went to the pest house, there was, especially with a thing like smallpox, 40% of you weren't going to go back.
Right, so they would send you off.
Shameful, and there was all these things that we learned, and that was like the first big movie that we did, was A Wonderful Plague.
Yes, and The Home of My Choice was the second one, and so it was a great honor to be selected to be in this show in Burlington and show both those pieces.
And now to be in the film festival.
In the film festival.
It's like, it's amazing.
It's wonderful, and we're so happy to be able to communicate these stories to a wider audience as a result.
Yeah.
I'm just like, you all like have me interested in getting to know more about, because we did the smallpox villages, and then you have the cemetery, but then you have Hart Island in New York where
Yeah.
their bodies are by numbers instead of by name, and it's like you all it's unpacking a lot of the things that we are dealing with now, because they had this, I don't know the truth behind it, but maybe it's true, I don't know, where they had mass graves for people who passed away from COVID or whatever.
Yeah, in Hart Island, they were burying mass graves there back in May. There's video footage of the graves that they didn't know who these people were, and they were just burying them on Hart Island. And we like to think that through contemporary art, we can tell the untold story of history and make these pieces of history relevant to people today, and in a way that it's engaging to them, that they will learn about it, but also realize the context and how it affects life today as well. This isn't something that's in the past. It's something that speaks to us now.
So this is where I didn't even realize that's where they were taking the body. So there's just a whole
Anybody who was unclaimed, and that's true in a lot of communities. They have, for unfortunately people who are homeless or people who don't have family, who knows, this is what ends up happening. And it's the kind of thing that I think it's something that should be part of the conversation.
Yeah, because you never know. Like, there's so many missing people, and so many people who still, who are not reported missing, and you got to give people the opportunity to find their loved ones. Okay.
It's upsetting.
It's upsetting.
When we were doing the research on A Wonderful Plague, and you look at the tolls of people who have died over millennia from different pandemics, it's horrendous. And the fear and sense of isolation that we've all been going through the last 10 plus months, we try to sort of say this is part of human history.
And this is something. This is not. You're not alone. In your loneliness or isolation. This is something that is. Yeah, it's part of the fabric of human history. Yeah. It's the title. I think I'd like to mention.
Yes.
A Wonderful Plague comes from the language from, what was it? The English Charter.
English Charter for the Pilgrims.
For the Pilgrims, and it was talking about how they believed that this land, they landed and they found these villages that were completely empty. And they thought, oh, God wants us to settle here. Look at all these resources that he has left for us. This is providential. A wonderful plague has come and eradicated the previous inhabitants and left us this wonderful place to live.
Right.
And so this idea that God was on their side,
right?
By giving the previous inhabitants, the Native Americans, this disease to make them go away.
Well, and a lot like Alexander.
So again, this idea of motive, like who tells the story?
Right.
Oh, God is telling us to do this. He wants us to do this. He's on our side.
A lot of kind of who's telling the story for Plague is similar to who's telling the story for Twilight.
Exactly.
And
there's always sort of this interesting underplay of who's getting what they want in this story.
This is, to me, like, I rarely read more about. I rarely find. I'm usually, some people shoots me an email and say, hey, but when I saw this, this is what pulled me in, because I was like, I didn't know there was a festival. And then the name of the movie, the name of the work, it made me think a little bit. And then, I didn't read your bio beforehand because I wanted to, discover it. And then now it's like, wait a minute now, I gotta, dig deeper. Because I've been saying, there's a episode of Cosby Show where Claire has a professor, I think it's Professor Caples or whatever, and she wore a hat, and her tagline was "Dig Deeper." So for me, it's like you all have been able to help people to dig deeper in finding their history and finding out more about it. So where can people go to find out more about you and the films that you're doing and the artwork?
Sure. The best place to go is probably our website. It's EveNSteve, so EVE, the letter N, Steve.com.
Okay.
And we're always posting artworks, shows that are up and coming.
New videos.
Show
the artwork.
Right. They can also go to Queens Underground 718.com
Yes.
for the festival. And there will be you know,
There'll be showings of the film.
Yes.
All the films.
All the films. And it spans this month, and then it starts up again in April. And so there'll be more festivals, more viewings, but
it'll be available virtually free.
Yes.
And then if people want to go in person, you can buy tickets to go in person.
Oh, this is awesome. Okay, listen. Thank you so much for educating me today. I'm excited because I want to try to get this to everyone as soon as I can, but this is an awesome, awesome subject. And the fact that you were able to actually find someone and then the fight over who had the first Black person to graduate. Now that's hilarious to me because somebody wants that badge and they're going to get it. So I thank you all so much for talking to me today and teaching me something new. And I love to learn new things. So this was actually up my alley, and especially, congratulations. I hope that you all win, during the festival, because of the fact that, it's off the beaten path from what we've been taught or what we've been, force fed, through the school system. And I really wish, one day it'll be all American history and we will know about all of these one-offs and all of these things that make us who we are, because, lo and behold, we're not all, different. It's just a little bit more melanin, and that's all it is. So, yeah, so I really thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm actually going to start reading more, and I'm going to the site today. So I definitely have to dig deeper. So I thank you. So, you're welcome. Like, this is, I'm like, my chops up. I'm ready to get to learning more. So this was great, and I thank you so much.
It was our pleasure.
You have a good day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.